Welcome to Book Talk. I'm Winston. I like to read good books, and you should too. Today we are talking about Where Do All the Calculators Go by Steve Trower. I don't know how many of you are fans of the British 80s, 90s, I think it was 80s, might have just been 90s, sitcom Red Dwarf. But Red Dwarf postulates that a character on there, Rimmer, is he is a janitor on board the Red Dwarf, and through a freak accident, he is preserved in cryostasis while an unfortunate calamity wipes out the entire rest of the crew. So he is awakened millions, thousands, millions of years later by the computer. Something has triggered it, and he wakes up, he comes out. He is the only human left on board the ship. He has a holographic companion who was his bunkmate in life, and the computer has recreated him as a hologram, and they can't stand each other, but the computer, whose name is Holly, has decided that this is the best companion to keep him safe, or to keep him sane on the ship. They discover Cat, who is a humanoid person who has evolved from the cat that Rimmer smuggled on board the Red Dwarf, which is the whole reason he was put in stasis in the first place, as punishment for bringing an animal on board the Red Dwarf. These are our characters: Holly, Rimmer, Cat, and the bunkmate, whose name I cannot remember for the life of me, which in itself is very Red Dwarf. But all I remember is that he's a smeghead, which is how they describe him in the show. And when he complains about it to the captain, to the officer looks at him and says, "Well, you are a smeghead." And it's that unique style of comedy that was from that time period, from that location, and it is an experience. Having said all that, by way of introduction, Where Do All the Calculators Go is Steve Trower's examination of the Bible through the lens of the Red Dwarf setting and characters. And I believe he even subtitles it The Gospel According to Red Dwarf. Now, Red Dwarf itself is not a theological show, shall we say. It is very secular. It is, in fact, nihilistically secular, according to the creators. And having said that, it also there's quite a bit of time on the show where the questions of spirituality and of meaning are examined in a meaningful way. But because of the kind of show it is, you don't get any concrete answers. Fortunately, we have this. This is a book of essays. It is going to look at different teachings in the Bible, look at different stories in the Bible, look at different theological principles as laid out in the Bible, and examine them through the lens of the Red Dwarf setting and characters in such a way that it's like asking, how is this principle played out in this episode of White Dwarf, or of Red Dwarf? How would this Red Dwarf character respond in this situation when confronted with this teaching? And this is, I'm not a hardcore fan of Red Dwarf. I have a bare familiarity with it. I haven't seen the show since I was in college. But I remember enough of the basics to get me by, and Steve Trower brings out the rest of the detail that we need to understand what he wants us to think about as he writes his book of essays. And that's what he wants you to do. He wants you to think about things. He wants you to think about what the Bible is saying, how it works in the red dwarf universe, how they are reflecting this truth, how they are interpreting this truth. And then he wants you to use your own facilities, draw your own conclusions, and apply your own reasoning. It is a wonderful book for people who like to think, who like to examine things. It is a wonderful book for people who have a great fondness for red dwarf. And it is a wonderful book for people who have an interest in theology and philosophy and want to think about those, especially as they relate to pop culture. I greatly enjoyed this. It's not very long. I finished it over an afternoon and a half. I would have finished it all in one day if I hadn't had to cut the yard. But I liked this book. I enjoyed it, and I think you will too. So your homework then is to find a good book and read it. Where Do All the Calculators Go? By Steve Trower. When you're done with that, come on back here because there's more book talk yet to come.